And what is going on, everybody? And welcome back to the Pick Swap Media YouTube channel. And it is the greatest time of year. It is NBA draft season. And in this video, we're going to be doing a full mock draft here. Each myself, Ryan Beef Coyle at Ryan Coyle 35 on Twitter, and Mark Henry Jr. at Mark Henry Jr. _ on Twitter as well. We'll be going pick by pick, giving our picks and predictions for how this mock draft or how this draft overall will take place. So before we dive fully into it, Ryan, how we doing today? And how we feeling now the draft is inching a little bit closer?
Yeah, a little over a week away now, a week tomorrow. And yeah, we were kind of talking before, and we've been talking about it. I feel like at least you and I, Sean, over these past few weeks, that really is no consensus. I feel like everyone's opinions on these guys are all over the place. So I think that's going to make for an actually really entertaining draft because it seems like we're going to get a lot of unknowns, maybe some trades thrown in there as well. But excited to see how it all shakes out.
Yeah, absolutely. And Mark Henry Jr., how are we? Are we ready for some madness on draft day?
Yeah, I think it's going to be fun. It's a bizarre year for the NBA to have split it into two nights. But I guess Bronny will carry the suspension into night two. But yeah, I'm excited. It's going to be a fun night because we have no idea what's going to happen.
Yeah, and I got to say, the more I dive into this class, I'm beginning to like them more and more. And again, I know we've kind of hammered this home a couple times now. It's for sure short on those surefire stars, the guys with the super high ceilings. But I just really like all the guys that I'm confident in are going to be really high-level role players for a long time in the NBA. I'm excited to talk about where each of their homes will be. So let's begin by jumping into this mock draft here. As I mentioned, we each have the teams that we will be handling. I did start with the number one pick here for the Atlanta Hawks, and we did switch things up to keep it so you're picking for the same representative team. For example, the San Antonio Spurs with the 4 and 8 pick, we kept it so you're managing the same team there. So that's a bit of how we're going to do it. We're going to kick things off with the number one pick, the Atlanta Hawks, who are in a bit of a different spot than you typically see for a team picking first. They obviously have 2 all-star guards in Trae Young and DeJounte Murray. And I think they take a little bit of middling the pack here by taking Alex Sarr as the number one overall pick. That would be my personal pick for the number one. I'm actually a believer in Sarr. I think he can be a 1-5 defender. I'm blown away by the way this guy can move up and down the floor. I think he can play off Trae Young just fine, catch lobs, and I think ultimately the Hawks have some real questions to answer. But Alex Sarr, a high floor guy, I think the ceiling's a little bit higher than he's been given credit, and I do think that's the one pick for the Atlanta Hawks there. So, Brian, I'll throw it to you real quick. Would that be where you go in that direction? We'll talk about the one pick a little bit in depth real quick.
We've talked about it a little bit before. I think in my opinion, Buzelis is my favorite prospect in this draft, like long term in terms of his ceiling. So if we're going based off of who we think is going to be the best long term player, I probably would go him. I think he could kind of fit in there on the wing and the forward spot for the Hawks. But I'm interested to see. I've been seeing more and more the guy from France, Zachary Richier, looking like he's going to be going number one, according to mocks more recently. But if I had to pick between the two, I'd probably go with Sarr over Richier. So interested. It really, I feel like every draft, most drafts, you go in like at least a 95% reality of who the number one pick's going to be. I feel like this one is pretty wide open. I mean, we might know the night of or the day before, but it's gonna the domino does start at number one, not like a few picks into the draft like most.
Yeah, absolutely. And we got Mr. Crockpot chiming in saying, "What's up, gentlemen? I'm coming for anyone that selects Devin Carter before pick 16. Yeah, that is the unfortunate reality is he's really crept up the draft board. Probably the biggest riser through this pre-draft process, which is really unfortunate for the Sixers. We got Sixer fan 229 chiming in as an Alex Sarr fan. Do you think Sarr starts on the Hawks if he goes one? Yeah, I would think so. I'd be surprised if it sounds like they seem pretty interested in moving on from Clint Capella anyway, a decent amount of interest there. But Mark, what do you think about that? Alex Sarr is the one pick for the Hawks, and would that be the direction that you would have went?
It's not the direction I'd go, but in this draft, that definitely is weak at the top. And I think we can talk ourselves into the middle, like the late lottery, even the kind of early 20s even. But I think Ryan Russillo kind of said it looks like a draft you chopped the top 5 off of, and then that's where you're starting at. So, and I do think that there's a lot of truth to that. So I'm fine taking a swing on a guy like a Sarr or a Zachary Richard. I'd probably go with the wing, as we're going to talk about a lot. I just think we've never been at a spot in the league where there's been more talented guards and bigs and less talented wings. Like, it just feels like there's such a dearth of talented wings. And I think one of the big reasons we just had to watch Boston, win last night was because they have two of the top 3, 4, 5, whatever you want to say, of the wings. And I think it's such a limited amount of them. So I'd probably lean a little bit towards Richard, but it reminds me of the draft with LaMelo and Wiseman. I was saying draft LaMelo or Wiseman one because I know that the knowns that we have are not very good. They're not very exciting. I was wrong. Anthony Edwards ended up being way better than I thought he'd be. But what I thought was that LaMelo had, and I think I was right on LaMelo having a ton of upside, and I was right about Wiseman having upside, but Wiseman had the lowest floor of all time because there was such a limited amount of data on him. It reminds me of the same thing in this draft, where it's a bad draft. I'm fine taking the swing on whoever you think has the highest upside.
Yeah, absolutely there. So we'll lock that in for the first pick, Alex Sarr. Beef, I'm throwing to you for number 2. With the Washington Wizards selecting second overall, what direction are you going?
I'm going to go with center Donovan Clingan out of UConn. I think they have an immediate need in the front court and just also kind of a need for a bit of stabilization. When Jordan Poole is really like your go-to, or Kyle Kuzma, that's not really screaming, stable options. But we've talked about it, Sean, where I think Clingan is your safest prospect in this draft in terms of floor, and I still think there's some room to grow into, especially on the offensive end. But he plays super hard. He rebounds the ball really well. He defends the rim really well. And I think he's going to be a guy that is able to kind of guard out on the perimeter if need be as well. And we've seen a little bit more of a growing offensive game with him. One thing I always kind of take into account with some of these prospects, like in high school, he played in the public school league in Connecticut. Like there was no one stopping him at all. All you had to do was throw it up to him and he was dunking it, or one step and dunk. He never really had to have much of an offensive arsenal. At UConn over the past 2 years, you kind of saw that begin to grow. It's still only a kid that was just a sophomore this year, so he still got plenty of time to continue to grow and develop that offensive game. But when you look at the Washington Wizards front court, they have arguably the worst front court in the entire NBA. I mean, Marvin Bagley is listed on their depth chart as their center from last year, and I don't believe he's under contract as of right now either. He might be, but I thought I saw he is a pending free agent. So this is a team that has major holes in the front court, and Clingan kind of gives them, a stable presence there and a guy that does have some potential to grow into.
Yeah, I like that. And we've kind of mentioned this a lot, how he's definitely the most what you're getting prospect. And it would not surprise me if there begins to be a little bit of a push for Donovan Clingan, even in the number 1 pick conversation leading up towards the draft getting closer. For what it's worth, I will note, I saw some line movement that he went from plus 1,500 to plus 700 to be the first pick as of last week. So kind of surprising there and something to pay a little bit of attention to. But Mark Henry Jr., what's your thoughts on Clingan and for him being used as the number 2 pick there?
In a vacuum, on my rankings, Clingan's my number 1 player in the draft. It feels like a weird pick at 1 for Atlanta when you have Capella, you have a Kongwu. Like, I love Clingan, and I think there's no scenario that he's not a useful big in the NBA. But if you're Atlanta, I kind of get wanting to take a home run swing at 1. But everyone else, I mean, I think there's a lot of buzz that Memphis wants to move up into the top 3 for Clingan. There was another team mentioned with that's slipping my mind right now. Maybe OKC.
I believe so. Yeah.
Yeah. I think it was OKC. Maybe it might have even been Utah as well. But there was a couple teams kind of in that like early or late lottery that were talking about moving up into the top 3. And I get why. He's kind of the guy who's a plug and play center who could play on him. I mean, he's a little bit like he could have a lively level impact. A different player, obviously more solid than Lively, kind of more thick than Lively, but definitely, I mean, a lob threat the same way, good rebounder. He could have an impact right away.
Yeah, I'm with you for sure. And let's stay with you, Mark, for the number 3 pick. That'll be the Houston Rockets on the clock here. So Alex Sarr at 1, Donovan Clingan 2. Who goes number 3 to the Rockets?
I think they would. I mean, first of all, the Rockets are just in like a bizarre situation. Like, what's the core for the Rockets? Like, are they a Jalen Green team? Are they a Şengün team? You have Tari Eason. He's kind of like been in and out of the rotation. Same with Cam Whitmore. Fred VanVleet's there, but how much longer is he there for? It's a short-term deal. Same with Dylan Brooks. It's a really weird team to try to figure out like what their even need is. So I'm just going to go best player available, and I'm going to go with Zachary Richey. I don't know exactly how to say it, but he's definitely a guy who I'm buying into, and it's because of the wing situation in the NBA, and he's developing into a knockdown shooter. And I understand some of the skepticism that's out there. This season, he's over 47% from three, from what I was reading, over 2022 to 2023. He's 34.3%, so that's definitely taken a jump. He was 65% from free throws then. That's jumped to 72% now. And I'm buying it on the eye test. He's got a really quick release. It's not necessarily like a picture perfect jumper that would be taught in schools, but it's a really quick release that he can get off pretty fast. And I think that'll help at his size. And he's got all the tools to be a nightmare defender. He shows really good instincts. But yeah, a lot of it is theoretical. And I know that the knock against him is being able to score at the rim. I feel like we've just seen so many wings struggle to score at the rim in college, who that ends up not being as big of an issue when you're a 3-and-D kind of guy. So, I mean, Brandon Miller was a guy who people really criticized him at the rim, and he was just better at the rim in the NBA. Not to say that that's everybody, but I would take the shot on Rashard or Rashay.
Yeah, I don't think he slips past 3 by any means there. I did want to mention this comment by Mr. Crockbach here saying that if he were the Hawks, he would trade down, and pointed out number 1 to the Spurs for 4 and 8. I do think that's an interesting framework of a deal, and I do think Risacher would be the guy that they're going up to get to try and pair with Wemby there. That would be a really intriguing kind of duo there. We know the French connection and all that. I'll say my skepticism of him is it was a bit of an outlier year from a shooting standpoint, and then there's a part of me that's concerned he just shot the lights out this year and that he's due for a little bit of regression. He also has shown some improvement on the finishing around the rim, but he's starting bar on the floor. He shot 37% at the rim last year, which is pretty brutal numbers there. He was closer to 50 this year, which still needs work, but certainly some intriguing signs there. He's real deal 6'10". He can shoot it. It's worth a swing. That I'm with you. It's tough when you're kind of projecting these international guys, but I absolutely agree that I don't think he slips back past 3 there. Ryan, what do you think on Risacher? Any opinion there, or are you of the same mindset that he does not get past the 3rd pick?
Yeah, I think this is one in between 1 and 3. I think it's going to be in terms of teams' preferences. But we were discussing before, Sean, how he's still playing. I don't know if he's still playing today, but as of last week or 2 weeks ago, he was still playing. I feel like that kind of was bumping up his draft stock a little bit more because all these guys are so removed from actual basketball. They're like, oh wow, look at this, fun, athletic, young wing shooting the ball really well. He's probably going to move up the draft board a little bit just because he's actually playing real basketball in front of these guys. So it could have been a little bit of, presence of the moment type thing. I'm not exactly the highest on him. I would prefer Sarr and Klingon over him if he is in the discussion at number 1. But the talent's definitely there. And for a Rockets team that I do think could certainly use some more shooting on the wing, it seems like a good fit there as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think Tijan Salon's been the guy that's been the biggest beneficiary of that he's certainly rocketed up draft boards. And I think a lot of it for that very reason, that you can watch this guy play actual basketball and he's playing well right now, kind of striking at the right time. So a good point there as well. To keep it rolling here, we move to the 4th pick, the San Antonio Spurs, and I myself am back on the clock here. I'm sticking in the college ranks for this pick, and I'm taking Reed Sheppard here. He's an interesting player. I'm very curious to see where he ends up. From the Spurs perspective, you have just about as high of a floor as you're ever going to get with the defensive player with Victor Wembanyama behind him. I don't think Sheppard is the defender he's being portrayed to be. He's very much a gambler. He very much likes to poke out from behind, jump passing lanes, play some Matisse Thybulle-like defense. He's not going to be a guy that really slides his feet and moves his hips the way that I prefer in a guy from a defensive standpoint, but he's there to shoot the lights out. He's going to be a floor spacer. 52% in college is insane from beyond the 3-point arc. There's a lot to his game beyond that. I'm in on Reed Sheppard. It does feel like the 4 pick's a little bit high, but I'm picking for fit to an extent here from the Spurs perspective. I think they can absolutely afford to roll with his downsides as well and locking him in for the 4th pick. So, Mark Henry Jr., I saw you react there. What are your thoughts on that pick?
That was definitely as the GM coming up of the Charlotte Hornets. We had our eyes on Reed Sheppard for sure. So that was the reaction.
Fair enough.
Yeah, I think it's a great pick for San Antonio. I really hope that they get a guard like a Sheppard.
Yeah, I'm definitely leaning towards that. I certainly hope they do add a guard. Somebody to make an entry pass to Victor Wembanyama, man. Please, somebody. And Sheppard, I do think, is going to be capable of that, at least higher than the bar set right now. So, Beef, any thoughts on that pick?
Yeah, I really like that one as well. I think with a guy like Wemby, where he's going to be demanding double teams constantly, if not potentially see some triple teams, you're going to want to surround him with as much shooting as possible. And I think Reed Shepherd is kind of like the Donovan Clingan version of the guard spot, where I think he's a really safe player. You know what you're getting from him. As you like to say a lot, Sean, you know what that kind of defining NBA skill set is. It's going to be the shooting from him. And I think he's also a player that is self-aware. Like, he's going to know his role. He's going to know what he needs to do to help the Spurs, especially as they revolve everything kind of around Wemby. So I love that fit there.
Yeah, absolutely. And the good old white guard from Kentucky comparison here. We got Nick chiming in saying, will Reed Shepherd have a better career than Tyler Hero? I don't know if I'm ready to officially say that. And I've the pendulum on Tyler Hero has been all over the place. I think we're at a point where the stock is a little bit too low on him, that he's a better player than he's getting credit for. It's an interesting comparison. I think Shepherd's more of a basketball purist than Tyler Hero, that I think he's going to know his role to an extent that Hero can't. I do think Shepherd's going to be a better defender. I think ultimately my answer is probably yes, but I'm not as locked in and cemented on that take as I probably would prefer to be for drafting the guy with the 4th pick. But any thoughts on that one, guys?
Yeah, Tyler Hero's a career 18 point per game, 44% from three, 6'6" wing. Like, if Reed Shepherd doesn't, first of all, have that size, and second of all, if Reed Shepherd is putting up those numbers and the Spurs do wind up making that pick, I think they're winning a couple championships over the next 4 to 5 years probably, and they're doing some cartwheels if Reed Shepherd turns out to put up those numbers.
Yeah, absolutely. Mark, any thoughts there?
Yeah, I'm not even the biggest Tyler Hero guy, but yeah, I mean, definitely. That kind of just tells you where we're at with this draft.
Yeah, absolutely. And let's keep this moving here. Beef, heading to you for the number 5 pick, the Detroit Pistons on the clock. Who will you be selecting?
Yeah, I talked about this guy at number 1, and he's my favorite overall prospect in this class. I'm going to go with Matas Buzelis out of the G League. 6'10", long, has some serious springs in his legs. Like, he gets off the floor and gets off the floor quickly. There was a video going around Twitter last week that says he might even be like the best dunker in this class. Great motor. And I think at times he kind of shows that the dog in him, like, give me the ball, get out of the way. Similar to his teammate in the G League Ignite, where his jump shot with Ron Holland is the big concern right now. But it looks good. Like, it looks solid to me. I think over time it's going to be something that comes along. But even if it, even if it doesn't, I still think with his frame, with his length, with his athleticism, I still think he's going to have a really serviceable 10 to 12 year career. And with the Pistons, kind of like what Mark was saying with the Rockets, like, is it Cade Cunningham's show going forward? Is he going to be the guy that carries that franchise? They're kind of in a not no man's land, but a little bit of kind of a wait and see mode, I guess, because they have to pay him as well coming up. But I think that could be a really nice future down the line 1-2 combo. See what Jaden Ivey continues to develop into. Jalen Duren is, evolved into a pretty consistent double threat on a nightly basis. So Buzelis is my favorite prospect in the draft, and I think if he slides to 5 there, that's a home run pick for the Pistons.
Yeah, I love it. And to be perfectly honest, this is the spot I'm kind of rooting for him to fall to, that I do think he can be like a pillar for that Detroit franchise. He's got a cool personality too, Matas, that I was watching. I forgot about him challenging Risa Shea to a one-on-one game. That was a couple months ago at this point. That was cool. And I saw Kevin O'Connor did an interview with him questioning him about that. And he was basically like, yeah, man, like, I just wanted to stir it up a little bit. Like, I knew that guy was the number 1 pick. I feel like I'm in at least the vicinity of him as a player. So let's make it happen. I kind of wanted to see it. And I do love that kind of outlook. He does got like a little bit punkiness and edge to him. And I mean that in a good way. He certainly had some highest of high moments and lowest of low moments at the G League Ignite. I think that's why there's some skepticism of him, along with the shot, as you mentioned. But I'm a big Matas fan. I'll be rooting for him, and I do hope Detroit's the spot. So, Mark Henry Jr., any thoughts on Buzelis?
Yeah, the G League guys are so concerning to me because it's just, I have no idea how to project them to the next level, and I feel like it's been a really mixed bag with how they've projected the next level. But in a draft like this, like I said with the Euro guys, I'm willing to kind of throw caution to the wind and take home run swings. There's a guy in the draft who's heavily linked to Detroit at 5, who I'm not going to say the name of, so I can hopefully get him with a pick later. But that's where I would go, and I'll circle that when we bring him up later.
Yeah, and I do want to dig deeper on the G League Ignite conversation when we get to Ron Holland, wherever he ends up as well, because there's a lot of talking points on him. But for now, let's keep it moving, and that is with you, Mark Henry Jr., with the 6th pick for the Charlotte Hornets. So as of now, the draft went Alex Sarr 1 to the Atlanta Hawks. Donovan Clingan 2 to the Washington Wizards. Zachariah Reese-Shea, number 3 to the Houston Rockets. Reed Shepherd at 4 to the Spurs. Matas Buzelis at 5 to the Pistons. And who will the Hornets be selecting at 6?
Yeah, Shepard definitely. I feel like Shepard's the dream for Charlotte. I feel like he makes a lot of sense with LaMelo, with LaMelo's size and Miller's size. You can kind of get away with kind of hiding Shepard a little bit. I think so. That's the dream. But I'm going to go with a guy who I don't think Charlotte's going to take at 6, to be honest, because it seems like he's falling past this earlier in the process. It seems like he wouldn't have been there at 6. Now it seems like 6 might be a reach for him, but Nikola Topic, I think, is being really disrespected by the draft process. And I understand that now he's hurt, so it's a little bit of a stash probably for the year, maybe for at least half the year. If you're Charlotte, I don't think you're expecting to win 50 games next year anyway. So I think you're fine taking Topic and letting him develop and hopefully really kind of coming at it again next year. And you almost have a second first-round pick that you're adding next year. But there's so much Goran Dragic to his game with him being a 6'6" guard and really good in the pick and roll, uses subtle pace changes, head fakes. He really, really is crafty below the rim. There's some fun highlights there with Topic, and there's some graphics out there that compare his stats per 36 to Luka and to LaMelo's in international play, and it's really similar. There's a ton of similarities. Kind of the two big differences are that he didn't rebound as well as those guys, and Luka got to the line way more, but he was also way more efficient than LaMelo was overseas. So I think Nikola Topic makes a ton of sense. And I'm a believer in the jumper. I know it's kind of people are up and down on it, but he's an elite free throw shooter. He's got great touch around the rim. I think the release looks fine to me. I think he'll probably develop into being, if not a good 3-point shooter, at least like comfortably below average to the point where you'll at least have to guard him.
Yeah, I'm with you that I do think Topic is being slept on, that this is a guy who had conversation about potentially being in play for the 1 pick just a couple months ago, that he was talking about as that type of prospect. The ACL is a tough look, and it is partially torn, so there's a chance that he could return for the season. Might not be a complete wash, but you're definitely taking this as a long-term view type pick, and I do think that's a good gamble for Charlotte to take. They could play some really fun basketball with him and LaMelo sharing the floor together, so I do like that selection there. Any thoughts on Topic, Ryan?
Yeah, that was right what you said at the end. I think that would be some really fun kind of playmaking ability with those with him side by side with LaMelo. Just basic court stuff or some of the injury history that he's had, but also like I could see him being a guy that, get me the hell out of Charlotte, send me to the Lakers, send me to the Clippers, something like that down the line. So this is a bit of an insurance policy for a guy that plays kind of a similar brand of ball too.
Yeah, great point there. And LaMelo is an interesting one, man. He's just a big kid who happens to have millions of dollars and has been that way since he was literally a big kid who had millions of dollars. So very funny there. Hopefully he stays healthy. The ankle injuries were really frustrating this year because he was pretty good when he was on the court. There just wasn't a lot of it. And that's unfortunately been the story all too much with LaMelo Ball. So we'll see how that shakes out. But Nikola Topic at number 6 to the Hornets. Beef, over to you for the 7th pick representing the Portland Trailblazers. What direction we going?
Yeah, Blazers are a team that's kind of a weird spot because they got so many young guys they're really invested in. Like when you look at their top kind of rotation, I know DeAndre Ayton's contract's coming up, but you got to remember too, Robert Williams. Like I'm a big Robert Williams fan. He didn't play at all this year, right? Because of knee injury. Mm-hmm. So like I still think that's a good front court piece. And like I've seen their name linked to trying to maybe trade up for Clingan as well. I don't really know why you would necessarily do that, like kind of trade up. Maybe just they really love his defense that much. So I'm going to go with a player that I think is also one of the safest players and a player that will fit right into the rotation next year. Dalton Connect out of Tennessee. I think when you look at some of the deficiencies of this young team, especially with the way Henderson shot last year, the shooting definitely needs to improve. If Henderson, with what we saw from him last year and what we kind of heard about him coming into the draft before, the athleticism, the ability to get to the rim, all that good stuff, you're going to need kind of shooting around that going forward. And Connect is a guy that isn't going to need the ball in his hand a ton to make an impact. He's just going to be able to kind of to catch and fire. You're not going to be asking him to play make. So you throw him in there with a core of Simons, Scoot Henderson, Shaden Sharp. Those are some pretty exciting athletes, and then you surround them with an elite shooter, arguably the best shooter in the draft. I think that's a pretty good fit there and a good value pick, because I do think Dalton Connect, at least between him, Klingon, and Shepard, probably are the three most kind of safe NBA ready guys out of this bunch so far. A lot more kind of potential based, but I love that fit there for Connect to the Trailblazers.
Yeah, I like that pick. And I do think he's the number one most NBA ready guy as far as he knows exactly what his role is going to be. I still think there's room to grow for Dalton Connect. I get he's 23, but he's improved every time he's gone up levels. And I think there's even potential for that to happen. Sixers fan 229 chimed in, said that he had Connect going 4 or 5. Certainly in play for those types of picks as well. That he is a guy that probably I have a wider range for than most of the players we've talked about so far. I could see him being absolutely a top 5 pick. I also see a world where he does fall down to 7. I think that would be a good spot for the Trailblazers. I did not put those pieces together, so I like that pick there. But any words on Connect, Mark Henry Jr.?
I mean, Dalton Connect, who I think kind of looks like Sean Barnard, by the way. I think that's why
that was a compliment for sure.
It's White Boy Summer, so Dalton Connect going as high.
He's my fourth pick in the top 10, and there's my fourth white guy. So this could come back to backfire.
No, that's funny though. I do think Connect's going to step into a role right away. I think Klingon's probably my number one most NBA ready guy, but Connect is on the top 3 to 5 of that list. There's another kind of similar guy to Connect. I think that's going a little bit later, and I feel like they should be going neck and neck, as me and Barnard have discussed before. But I like Connect, and if he somehow fell to 16, he would definitely be a guy I would love to look at if I was the Sixers.
Absolutely. That would be a dream situation. And we'll touch a little bit more on that as we get deeper into the Sixers picks here. But there's a lot of guys that I think are slipping that should be intriguing from the Sixers perspective. So we will get to that. But for now, we're going to keep it moving for the number 8 pick. I'll preface this by saying this is not a dude that I'm pounding the table for as a prospect, but I do see this as a good fit. And that's Stephon Castle going to the San Antonio Spurs as the 8 pick there. And the number one thing that I want the Spurs to do when Stephon Castle gets to the organization is you need to grab him by the shoulders, shake him, and say, you are not a point guard. Because I do think that message needs to get into his brain there, despite the way that he is really trying to position himself by only taking workouts with teams without a starting point guard, all these types of conversation. I think Castle's a guy that's going to fit in exactly to what the Spurs are building there, that I think he can be more of this wing next to Devin Vassell is kind of the archetype of player I see for him. He's a high floor guy. You know what you're going to get. He's going to make the right decisions. He's just a good basketball player. I don't love him as a prospect as far as the highest floor, but I do think he fits here and could be a part of the long-term core. So I will go to the San Antonio Spurs, selecting Stephon Castle at number 8. Mark Henry Jr., your thoughts on that one?
I think it makes a lot of sense with Shepard. I think Castle Shepard would be a really, really interesting pairing. Whatever concerns I have with Castle offensively, which do exist, I don't know if I'm totally sold on him as a lead guard. To be honest, and it seems like he really wants to be, or at least he's putting out there that he should be. But I think some of those really get alleviated next to Shepard, obviously.
Yeah, absolutely. Beef, your thoughts on that one?
Yeah, those are my thoughts exactly. If you're able to get a guy like Reed Shepard, who I don't think will be a 50% shooter from 3 in the NBA, but still a guy if he shoots between 38 and 42% at the NBA level, and then you Castle kind of, I think that minimizes that deficiency of his shooting. It's like you're not really going to be asked to do that as much when you got a guy like Shepard. And then to pair, I think, his really strong defensive ability at the guard spot, be able to lock down opposing guards, and then you have Wemby there kind of holding it down in the middle. I think it's that's a perfect fit if they're able to do Shepard and Castle there at 4 and 8. The Spurs are certainly doing cartwheels and really excited, I think, going into next year, and maybe even kind of positioning themselves to make a trade and give up some future assets, because I think they could be Thunder-esque maybe next year. I don't know about the 1 seed, but play themselves into that kind of 4 or above range if Wemby takes another leap.
Yeah, I do think the Spurs are absolutely a team to watch as far as taking a leap this year. And I think it'd be a slam dunk if they walk away with Reed Shepard and Stephon Castle out of the draft, which is a huge launching point for that. So absolutely with you there. We'll slide over to the number 9 pick, which is the Memphis Grizzlies on the clock. Mark Henry Jr. representing them. What direction are we going for Memphis?
There's obviously those rumors that they really want Klingon. So obviously they probably are looking at bigs. But if I was the Grizzlies, I would be desperate for a wing. It feels like they've needed one forever. You look at their team, their best players are Ja, Bain, Smart, and Jaren Jackson. And there's no wings there out of those. So I think that there's a perfect guy right there for them in Cody Williams. So I would go with Cody Williams, who you guys know I'm much higher on. It seems like the draft industry's catching up to your boy with Cody Williams. It seems like he's going in the top 5 now. Detroit is really being linked strongly to Cody Williams, and apparently they've fallen in love with him. And I forget, they said, oh my God, who was it? They brought in him and against someone else in a workout, and they said I think it was Connect, actually. I think it was Williams and Connect, and whoever it was, he smoked them. So that was the rumor out there with Detroit. I don't know if Memphis would take someone like Cody Williams, because Memphis might want to compete right away. Maybe they make a pick that's a little bit more of a win now pick. I don't know who that necessarily is out of what's available. Maybe a different player from Colorado, but that feels a little high at number 9. But I think Cody Williams is the perfect pick for them, and they should. I mean, they're still young enough with John, Bain, and Jaren still all being so young. I'd be fine taking a swing on Cody Williams, because I tweeted it out last night, but that Oregon game, the highlights from that game, I watched that live, and it's definitely why I've been so bullish on Cody Williams since, because he showed so much in that game of being a potential 3-level scorer. He's 6'7" with a 7'1" wingspan. There's just so many similarities to Jalen Williams. It's hard to ignore that he's brothers with one of the 40 to 50 best players in the NBA. Jalen Williams also, as a freshman, which Cody Williams just was much worse than Cody was at a lower level at Santa Clara. He averaged 7, 3, and 2. He shot like 40%. And even if he came out that year, I think we know it would have been worth taking a swing on Jalen Williams. We're looking at what he's turned out to be. And Cody's a fluid ball handler with either hand. I obviously 42% from 3, but it's extremely limited attempts. He shot 80% from the line in high school as opposed to 72% in college. So I'm just buying in, and I'm willing to buy in with the bloodline and with the size and the traits and the limited, sample size from 3. I think he should go in the top 3, let alone the top 5. So I love Cody Williams.
Yeah, you're certainly higher on Cody Williams than myself, and I believe Beef here as well. But it is interesting, like that kind of stuff does stick with you. That you mentioned seeing the Oregon game live. I checked like his whole box score out, and I do think I caught like most of his bad games every time that I did watch Colorado, which that's just kind of luck of the draw there for how that is. But that is something that sticks with me. I do question like his processing of the game, his decision making, and really keeping up at NBA speed. And Jalen Williams is one of my bigger misses from a scouting perspective, that I was not a Jalen Williams believer, and he absolutely is the real deal. And my concern with Jalen Williams is like kind of to the same concept that I have, that I want a defining trait. I didn't think Jalen Williams would be capable of being as ball dominant as he was at Santa Clara at the NBA level, and I questioned those complementary skills. Turns out he was just straight up good enough to have the ball in his hands, as much as that was the case. It's interesting, though, like Jalen Williams was nasty at Santa Clara. He looked unbelievable by his final year. Cody Williams, playing at a Power 5 conference on a higher competition level, like, is still just kind of a toolsy feeling guy. And you mentioned that he is still a freshman, early in the developmental arc. There's a lot to believe in. I like this fit for Cody Williams at 9 in Memphis. I'm cool with the pick. I'm just still there's teams that I think if they take Cody Williams, I'll be ready to say that was an absolute mistake. I don't believe in this kid. I can get behind it with 9 at Memphis, but Ryan, what are your thoughts on all of that?
Yeah, the Grizzlies are a real interesting spot in this draft, because Mark was kind of saying it, where their whole core is young. I mean, they're all what? They all have to be under 25, 26 or so, I would say still. So do they opt for another kind of long-term piece, especially there on the wing, or do they? I could see them going like the veteran route and maybe getting like a Devin Carter, a guy that could be like their first guy off the bench kind of, and be an impact kind of player right now. Because I do think with a fully healthy Ja, they expect to be a top 4 team probably in the Western Conference next season. So they are an interesting team. Where do you buy more stock long term and maybe kind of play this year off and hope to build into that more, or take a win now guy right away? They're kind of similar situation as the Hornets with LaMelo. Like, what are we gonna, or is Ja really gonna be the face of this franchise long term, or are we gonna have some more problems with him? So they're in an interesting spot as a franchise.
It's tough for them with the guards, because unless they move Smart, that they don't have a lot of guard minutes, and they might move Smart. I mean, it's not a crazy contract to move, and if they do, I know a team in Philadelphia that they should probably give a call to. But Marcus Smart is kind of their sixth man, I guess, after Ja and Bane, and they play them. I think they can play all three potentially. They didn't get to this year with people with Smart being hurt and Ja being suspended. It never lined up, but they're really, really an interesting team. It wouldn't shock me if they traded the pick for like a player, if that trade is out there. And there's the rumor that Caruso, there was teams in the top 10 offering their pick for Caruso, and the Bulls said no. Memphis, maybe if you trade Smart and you trade that pick for Caruso, like I don't know. I'm spitballing there, but yeah, they're an interesting team. And back to what Barnard was saying, and it kind of goes back to what we were talking about on the Tough Cover a couple of weeks ago, and it's just I'm so much harsher when I'm grading guards, because if you go rank, like, where is Fred VanVleet right now if you rank point guards in the NBA? Is he top 20?
Yeah, I think he's top 20. He's at the tail end of that, but I think probably.
Yeah, I think it's tough. I think if you sat down and looked at it, you'd be like, maybe. Like, I think he's probably around like 20-ish. Like,
yeah, and
that just shows I think he's a good player. And I just think whatever the Fred VanVleet level wing is probably like the 8th best wing in the league. So that's just a despair or a scarcity thing. So I'm willing to be more accepting of theoretical wings because of what they can be. Whereas a guy like Scoot Henderson, who everyone was in love with last year, I was like, he's not a good enough shooter for me to be in love with as a guard prospect. I basically need you to check all the boxes if you're a guard prospect because of how many talented guards there are.
Yeah, that's all very fair there, and will be interesting to see. I've warmed up to Cody Williams slightly, but still a guy I'm skeptical of. But
because I've been yelling in your ear about it for 2 months.
Yeah, pretty much. That has been the driving force of it. But we'll keep it rolling here. Sliding over to the 10th pick, which is represented by Ryan Coyle there. The Utah Jazz are on the clock, a team that I feel is in the position to make an upside swing. Is that the direction that you were going, Beef?
Yeah, my pick was is a guy that I don't know if he'll necessarily be ready to make an impactful play some impactful minutes year one, maybe even year two, but I think long term he's going to be a nice NBA player. I really like the talent. I'm going to go with Jacoby Walter here out of Baylor. I think the upside is certainly there. Sean, we talked about it where in spurts you saw it, but it was also a up and down kind of lack consistency season. When you look at kind of the Utah depth chart going forward, and what do you project Walter as, like a 3? I think he's probably like a 2, but Colin Sexton has, I think, 2 more years left on his contract. They get out of that 26, 27. So he could be like a rotation player behind Sexton for a couple of years and then kind of slide in long-term next to another Baylor guy who I was really high on last year. And he had a pretty nice rookie year there in Keontae George. But this seems like a Danny Ainge type pick. Like I'm not going to say he's going to evolve into a Jaylen Brown, but a raw athletic wing with some upside for sure. That might go a little bit higher than expected because Ainge kind of sees the long-term potential. So I think you can make an argument in the front court too, because I did see John Collins' name floated around in a trade yet again. It seems like that's every single summer. But Jacoby Walter there, I really like the upside, and I do think for a Jazz team that has like a pretty loaded like kind of rotation, full rotation as of right now, take a guy that'll probably play in a year or two instead.
Yeah, interesting. I think that's the higher side of where I've seen Jacoby Walter in the mix there. That wasn't the direction I expected you to go, but I do like your logic and the mindset there. For me, Walter's another guy that I'm a little bit skeptical of. I don't like guys that are labeled as shooters when they're below 40% three-point shooters, and that's where Jacoby Walter falls in, right around 36%. Or I think he was 30. Let me double check that. 32% is what he came at. 36% from the field is what I believe. Fact check myself on that one. There are some tools there. He's got size. He's much more like a guard that plays like a wing, if that makes sense. I do believe in Jacoby Walter a little bit in the long run, but I think this would be a good spot. And to officially get the stats right, he was a 34.1% three-point shooter and a 37.6% shooter from the floor. It's a little bit light for a guy whose reputation as a shooter for me. I get it. There were some issues with that Baylor team for sure. And I'll throw it to you, Mark Henry Jr. You look to react a little more positively than I did for that one. You like that spot for Jacoby?
Yeah, I'm a big Jacoby Walter guy. I think there's just obvious upside there. He's really good at drawing fouls. And he shot 34% from 3, but he shot like 6.5 threes a game. Like, I almost would rather you be 34% from 3 shooting at that amount of volume than be like 40% on like 3 attempts a game. Like I do think that there's was that smile because we just talked about Cody Williams.
Yeah, I was
yeah,
going to throw him.
yeah, I get that. I didn't see what I was doing before I did it there. But in general, though, I think Jacoby Walter's reputation as a shooter, I buy it. And a lot of it is eye test, and I understand that. But Baylor was a really weird situation. They were so up and down, so 3 heavy. They didn't really have a lead guard. Everyone kind of was just like, all right, your turn now, like, and your turn now. And it still worked out. They had a good offense. They had a ton of talented guys. But I don't necessarily think it was the right situation for Jacoby Walter to show what he is. And he's also, his 6'10" wingspan makes him such an interesting potential defender. Not that he showed you a ton defensively in college. It's projection. But it's like, you see so many guards like Melton who become so good on defense in part because of that wingspan that they have. And I think he's just going to be hard for guards to deal with as a 6'4" guard with a 6'10" wingspan.
Yeah, absolutely there. You guys make a great case. So maybe we do see Jacoby find his way in the top 10 there. I do think it's a little bit of the higher end, but ultimately this draft is a huge question mark. So absolutely could happen there. To keep it moving.
One last thing for me on Jacoby too. I think in spurts you kind of saw the star potential. I had in my notes he had 18 games this year where he scored 15 or more points, and he had 14 games where he hit at least 3 threes. So you saw it in definitely spurts, but the consistency is the big thing that he needs to kind of pick it up on.
Yeah, definitely. And that kind of feeds into the next guy that I'm going to bring up here with the Chicago Bulls with the 11th pick. Another guy with some consistency concerns, but a guy that I frankly think should have been off the board already, and that is Ron Holland there. So a G League Ignite guy, I feel like I'm missing something with Ron Holland, man. He's 18 years old. He's a guy that, like, the concern is he thinks he's better than he is, that he's a guy that will kind of have that superstar mindset with maybe not the superstar skill set. I think he's going to be a 1 through 5 defender, absolutely a 1 through 4. He's got near a 7-foot wingspan. The shooting, just 27.3% from 3 this year, so needs to get better. He is a guy that plays with a physicality that I really like. I think defensive stopper is going to be his calling card at the NBA level, and he'll have to embrace that. But I believe in Ron Holland as a prospect. I think there's a little bit of G League Ignite prejudice being held against him. He's been a dude that has been mentioned as like a real deal top tier athlete and prospect for most of his lifetime, that he was a top recruit, all those types of things. So I like Ron Holland a lot. He's a guy that definitely seems like a faller in a lot of the recent mocks, and I could see sliding even a little deeper than that. But I don't think he deserves for that to be the case. I think he should have been off the board in the top 10. But Mark Henry Jr., I'll start with you. What do you think about Ron Holland?
The Sacramento Kings just had their 2 players that they wanted taken at 10 and 11 there. So Ron Holland I think Ron Holland is like a perfect fit for the Kings as well, because they need some defensive help so badly there with Fox and Sabonis as your core pieces who don't play defense. So he would be a dream fit for Sacramento. And so I'm sorry, who was 11 again?
11 was Ron Holland. That was.
I'm saying to what team?
The Chicago Bulls.
Chicago. Okay, yeah, that makes a ton of sense. And yeah, you put him next to Alex Caruso. That defense is nasty on the perimeter. But yeah, I'm skeptical with some offense stuff, but the defense is obviously. I think his defense is good enough that it'll afford him a lot of opportunities to develop on offense.
Yeah, absolutely. Beef, what about you?
I think that tweet that was going around, it was either yesterday or today, about how the ownership stepped in and axed a Caruso trade because they wanted him to compete for the playoffs. That kind of pushes me against, like, all right, if they're running the draft, I don't think Ron Holland's a guy. I think they definitely go for more of a win now type player, a guy like a Devin Carter or I don't really know at this point, or like a Tristan Da Silva maybe, kind of a guy that goes in there and plays from day one in the league. If they're probably hoping for a guy like escaping my head right now, the player, but or Dalton Connect, like a Connect to fall to them, something like that. I don't really see them taking a swing on an upside guy like this, especially if around the trade deadline they're saying how they want to compete for the playoffs. They're probably trying to get as much as they can to kind of compete right now.
Yeah, sometimes what you should do and what you will do are 2 completely different stories, and I think unfortunately the Chicago Bulls are an example of that quite a bit. So yeah, a poorly run franchise. I think this would be the right move for them, so I'm taking that. But I do hear your message there, Beef. And let's stick with you with an organization that I do think does things the right way, that being the Oklahoma City Thunder, who are on the clock for the 12th pick. Ryan, what direction are you going for the Thunder?
So I was kind of back and forth with this one. I was deciding between 2 players that I love in this class, 2 of probably my 5 to 6 like just favorite overall players. I'm not saying best prospects, but one in the front court, one in the back court. I'm gonna go with the one in the back court. He slid too far, in my opinion. I'm gonna give Rob Dillingham here to the Thunder. I think as a long-term kind of backup scoring option there to SGA, I think that's a good fit. I think Josh Giddey probably won't be around there much longer. You're going to need some more kind of guards in the backcourt. Casey Wallace, forgive me, I don't think he had that impactful of a role this year at least, but they're two kind of completely different players. And then Isaiah Joe, just as we know, pure kind of shooter. Rob Dillingham gives that backcourt a little bit of everything, or a little bit of something that they don't have with that kind of pure scoring ability. He's not going to really be asked to go out there and run a team. He'll probably just be playing, at least in this spot, kind of spot minutes behind SGA and kind of go out there and fill it up. So I think the Thunder, with all their draft picks, all their ammo over the next few years, are kind of in position here to take a swing on a guy that could be, one of the gifted scorers in the NBA if all kind of pans out with his talent. So I was between him and Khalil Ware as my other pick to kind of spoil it, but I'll give it to Rob Dillingham there.
I like it. Mark, what about you? What do you think?
If I was the Thunder, I'd trade 4 of their $1 million draft picks and get Donovan Clingan, because I really do think it would be worth it for the Thunder. If you put Clingan on that team, I think they probably win the West next year. I really do. I think they were a center away from winning the West this year. They gave Dallas a heck of a series, and if PJ Washington doesn't shoot 60% from 3 in that series, and if they have any sort of interior defense, I think that they would have won that series. But I do understand wanting to go in the backcourt because. And I think Dillingham, a lot of his inefficiencies on defense would get covered up by SGA, who, again, is a longer guard. And I think is better on defense than he's given credit for sometimes. So I think that's a fit that makes a lot of sense. And, Giddey's got a weird case. Why is he around? So there's a chance he's gone. I think he's probably gone. So I like Casey Wallace a lot, but he's kind of more of like a defensive, kind of probably a sixth man. So I think Dillingham makes a ton of sense.
Yeah, and a guy that seems to be probably the biggest faller in recent days, and a lot of that due to size and the defense. There are legitimate concerns there, but I do think he's that special as a scorer that you overlook that and find ways to make it work. I'm very curious to see how much the slide is for Dillingham, because there were moments this year where he straight up took over games from a scoring perspective, and that does mean something to me. So I like that spot for Oklahoma City to add him to the mix there, another young talent to just kind of throw in and let them all figure it all out. So interesting pick there. We'll move to the 13th pick. The Sacramento Kings are now on the clock, and Mark Henry Jr. will be representing. I know you mentioned a few of your guys have been handpicked out from under you already. What direction were you going for the Kings?
Yeah, Ron Holland was definitely the guy who I had sized up, and then I think there was someone else I was looking at. But I'm going to go with Tristan da Silva, who's a guy who I absolutely love. He's one of my favorite players in this class, and I think he slots right in and can play with lineups that have Fox, Keegan Murray, and Domantas Sabonis, which is probably their core, I'd say. I think you could play him with Fox, Barnes, and Sabonis as well, and you could kind of play with either one of their forwards there. Depends if they keep Monk around in terms of what their kind of core is, but I think Da Silva makes a ton of sense there. Would add kind of another three-point shooter, which I feel like they need a little bit of with Barnes getting worse as he gets older, and I think that Tristan da Silva, in terms of him being able to play right away, is probably one of the best options in the league.
Yeah.
Or in the draft. It's probably right there with Clingan, right there with Connect. And he's a guy who's been a role player throughout his time at Colorado. His last year was a little bit bigger of a role. But even there, he had Cody Williams, who was a projected top 5 pick, and he had KJ Simpson taking a lot of reps there at Colorado. So I think Tristan da Silva is a guy who will be able to accept a role right away and a guy who's able to compete right away, which the Kings are probably looking for.
Yeah, I love Tristan da Silva. He continues to climb up my personal draft board. That I just like his game a lot, and a guy that I think the floor is about as high as it gets. That I just see everywhere where this guy is like a 5th starter on a team or a rotation player and contributing at a high level. So I like that pick. Beef, your thoughts on Tristan da Silva to the Kings?
Yep, not much more to add there. I do think one of the more NBA kind of ready guys, and as Mark said, when you already have your young core kind of in place, you're looking to fill in around him. I think he's a perfect piece to do just that.
Perfect. And we'll keep it moving, sticking with you. The Portland Trailblazers on the clock for the 2nd pick. Mind you, with the first selection, you went with Dalton Connect for the Trailblazers. What will you do with the 14th pick?
Yeah, so this is, I think, for a more long-term kind of approach. I think they probably play out with the rest of what Aiton has now, and I think they kind of get their long-term center with Khalil Ware. Big on his talent and his upside. I think when he's locked in, and it's not really saying much for this class, but when he's locked in, I think he's one of the top 5 talents in this class. I don't think his talent is his talent's undeniable. Just whether what kind of version are you getting of him? If it is his head on straight, is he playing hard? But I really like his athleticism. I think the jump shot is going to be a legit threat over time. And with the rumors of the Blazers potentially wanting to trade up to get Donovan Clingan, it seems like they're going to be in the market for a center. And I think if all pans out, you have some patience, maybe 2-3 years down the line, Khalil Ware could be even better than Donovan Clingan, who we had going at number 2. So this is more of a long-term play. He probably won't play much, if at all, this year. And I think he could benefit from that, going and probably just playing a bunch in the G League if he's able to. But give me Khalil Ware here.
Yeah, Beef definitely a Khalil Ware believer, and I do respect it. The talent's definitely there. The skill set shot over 40% from 3 this year. He's an intriguing talent and did a really nice job rewriting the book on himself after he was looked so down upon after that season at Oregon. So interesting spot for him. I do like that. Mark Henry Jr., what are your thoughts on Khalil Ware?
Yeah, definitely had some teams coming up that had Ware on their big boards. So anytime you get a big who can shoot like that, I'm interested.
Yeah, absolutely. And we'll slide to the number 15th pick, which is the Miami Heat, who I will be representing. I will be heartbroken if this is how it plays out on draft night, but I do think that this is a pretty likely case for how it is, and that is the Miami Heat selecting Devin Carter here out of Providence. That's going to hurt if he's a Miami Heat player, man. He's exactly their identity. He makes up Heat culture. He's a hard-nosed defender. He's Josh Hart-like the way that he rebounds the ball. Over 8 rebounds per game for a dude that measured in at 6'3" is absurd stuff, and he does not feel 6'3". He absolutely plays bigger than that. He took some 3-pointers from deep this year, too. We're talking borderline logo range. I like Devin Carter. I think he's another guy that's going to be pretty much plug and play no matter where he ends up. I do think defensively he's going to be mostly his calling card. Wish he was a little bit bigger, but overall not a huge concern for me. I think he likely goes even higher than 15, but the Heat will be licking their chops if he gets to this point and they take him there. Mark Henry Jr., your thoughts?
Yeah, so Devin Carter wouldn't have been my pick at 16.
Wow.
With someone else that's still on the board who I love. But Devin Carter would have been my number 2 pick he would have been my pick if you picked that guy. So Devin Carter is definitely a guy he's got a 6'8" wingspan as a guard. It's kind of the same conversation we had with Walter but he obviously showed a ton more on defense, and he's going to step in and be able to defend at the highest level right away. But I'm worried about the offense. I'm more worried than the rest of people seem to be. I feel like he's been crowned as like a top 10 player in this draft. And I just, again, you have to check a lot of boxes for me to be in on you as a guard. And we're going to get to someone who checks just a couple more boxes for me for the Sixers coming up next.
Yeah. Beef, any thoughts on Devin Carter to the Miami Heat there?
Yeah, as we kind of went down the pecking order there of draft picks, I was surprised no one was kind of calling his name, and I feel like between everyone on kind of NBA draft Twitter, it's been saying that he's a lottery pick for sure now, maybe even find his way into the top 10, and we even discussed him at several of these options. But I do love him as a player, as a prospect, but it is kind of like a weird kind of style because he plays bigger than he is. Is that going to translate to the NBA when he is going against guys that are 6'5", 6'6", instead of being 6'3"? Because I said it earlier, on Twitter earlier, 13 double-doubles this year with points and rebounds. Is that going to be a translatable skill? We saw Josh Hart do it, but Josh Hart is a little bit bigger. So I do agree it will hurt to see him go there. I would love to see him go to the Sixers, but would be a pretty good pick there and probably be an all-star if he winds up somehow in Miami.
Yeah, definitely. And that would break my heart, but I do see it. I think he can be Kentavious Caldwell-Pope like that's all I'm expecting offensively. Be a catch and shoot 3-point shooter. I don't think he's ever going to be a guy pouring in points, but I do believe in the floor from that regard. To catch up on a couple comments here, we got H showing you a little bit love. Beef saying thanks for the Ade Mara update. Beef, you were the only one with that knowledge, respect there, so love that. And I did want to jump into this comment before we dive into the Sixers pick. Should the Sixers trade 16? I know me and Mark Henry Jr. are very much aligned in this, but Mark, give me the sales pitch. Why is that a bad idea for the Sixers?
You have an extremely limited amount of assets to add players this offseason. And I know people look at the Sixers offseason, they're like, they only have 2 players. They can do whatever. But in all reality, they have $65 million just about to spend. You're going to go out and you're going to get a max player. You're going to trade for a high-level player. Let's say it's a Paul George in this scenario who Joel was side-eyeing a couple days ago. So let's say it's Paul George. He makes $49 million. You have 3 players on your roster. You have $16 million in cap. Fill out 12 more spots. That's the situation you're in if you max at Paul George. And by the way, that's not me saying they shouldn't. It's just me saying that's the situation you're in. You have to maximize that $16 million. You have to nail a mid-level guy. You have to hit on a minimum guy in the same way Daryl did last year with Kelly Oubre. And you have to keep the 16th pick because it's one of your only chances at a cheap role player. And if you can go out and get someone who can compete and can contribute right away, I think that's what you have to do. There's no scenario where I'm okay with trading 16. Even if it's a player I like I really like Alex Caruso. I think Alex Caruso's on a really good deal. If they went and they traded 3 of their future first round or 2 of their future first round picks for Caruso, I'd rather that than giving up 16. You have to add a player at 16.
Yeah, I'm of the exact same mindset of you. And I think the Sixers team in general passes up on bringing young talent too often. You only have so many limited opportunities to have that, where you can bring in a young talent that can grow. This is one of them. And I do think from the salary cap perspective, there's a $4 million cap hit for the 16th pick. If they're trying to duck that much money, it's a concern. Like, I get it, but that's just worth it. That this can be an absolutely above what you're paying for the production based on if you hit on this player. So I'm with you. I hope they keep it 100%. I'm also very much with you that I would rather them trade future picks than the 16th pick for sure. Beef, what's your mindset on that?
Yeah, I tweeted out the exact same thing that Mark was just saying earlier. I said if they do wind up signing George, you have him, Embiid, Maxey, all in max deals. You have to keep that pick because it's your best hope at a cheap rotation player and hopefully a guy that is able to come in day one. If you're going the trade route, I think you'll probably most likely have to move that. But that's also next week. Like, are we able? The NBA calendar better than me, Sean. Are we able to make a trade during the draft next week for just say if it does come up like Jimmy Butler?
Yeah, the short answer, yeah. It's not the easiest thing to do. I'd be surprised if there's something that demonstrative on draft night. But to put it short, yes, I do think that Daryl's getting in the lab and looking at every avenue possible for those types of things. So very much could be possible there. So with all that being said, Mark Henry Jr., I turn it over to you. With the Sixers on the clock for the 16th pick, who do they select?
They select Duke guard Jared McCain. And I would love the fit. And I know there's people out there that are going to say, can McCain and Maxey work defensively in the playoffs? My response to that is what Trobro Dude always says anytime we talk about this type of stuff. Defense has never been the reason that the Sixers get knocked out of the playoffs. There has not been a single series that you can point to and say it's defense. It's half-court offense. And you know what would help with a half-court offense? A guy who shot over 41% from 3 on volume amount of attempts last year. He had a 9-game stretch where he averaged 18, 6, and 2 with 1.4 steals a game, shooting 48% from the field and 40% from 3. He's great on transition threes, runs a great pick and roll, which that would be a really that's something fun to do with Joel. And I know he doesn't love doing it, but it gives him another option. His comparison on the Ringer draft guide is Seth Curry, and I get why. But I think he's just so much more competitive defensively than Seth Curry's ever been. There's so much similarities, to be honest, between Jared McCain and Reed Shepherd. Like, he's a little bit of great value Reed Shepherd, to be honest. There's a lot that he's painted nails Reed Shepherd. I guess. So I obviously one shot. What did Shepherd shoot? 57% from 3.
52.
52, yeah. So one shot 52%, one shot 41%. There's definitely a gap there. But I think McCain and Maxey are good enough shooting wise, and you have Joel on the court. Whatever the defensive worries that you have in this situation, let's say you have Paul George, let's say you have Joel Embiid, I think you can handle the defensive kind of the backcourt of Maxey and McCain because of how good they'll be on offense.
Yeah, I like that pick, and I agree. Got some love in the comments as well, saying love the McCain pick and agree picking here is more valuable than trading for a role player. Hope Morey sees that. Absolutely. And Jared McCain is that type of player. I think there's a real chance that he ends up like the best shooter in this draft. I think he's very much going to be in that top 5 mix. He's got some steep competition with the Dalton Connects, Reed Shepherds, and a couple other guys in this class as well. But McCain is every bit that elite shooter, and shooting's at a premium now more than ever. So I am with you. I do think he can play next to Maxey too. McCain also not a guy who's like a pure point guard, but I do believe in the way that he reads the game. The 1.9 assists per game, I think, is a little bit misleading there. That I think he's better than that indicates. And I will also add 5 rebounds per game is something to note there. That for a guy that is only 6'3", he was committed to the glass, which I like to see. So I like that pick. I would be satisfied with McCain at 16. Beef, what about you?
Yeah, he was going to be my pick, next pick for the Lakers at 17. I think he is a pretty exciting player. He's got that kind of innate ability that it's not really something that you're able to coach. It's kind of just like the way that he plays has the ability to kind of flip the game on his head with his shooting. Like you could see, I could see a chase down block by Embiid followed up by a logo type 3 from McCain, and it kind of lights the building on fire. Like he's got that firework ability from downtown. Is he just going to bring that to the table? I still think if he does, that's a good pick for a win now type team, especially if they do go out and invest in a guy like Paul George. Get another really good knockdown shooter and say, just go shoot the ball, buddy. That's all we're really asking for you to do over these next 2 to 3 years as we try to make this title push. So if he does go to the Sixers, there's certainly a few guys that I would probably like above him, but I would be satisfied with that pick.
Yeah, and I do love the sound of that logo 3 off an Embiid block there. Also want to throw this take at you.
Yeah.
Mark Henry, I think you'll like this as well. From H here says, in my opinion, guards in the NBA are like running backs of the NFL. They're replaceable. Wing players are harder to come by. That's why I think the Sixers have to draft a small forward. And he mentions either Ron Holland or Keyshawn George. We'll dig into George in a little bit. I don't think that's quite fair to say that I think guards are more valuable than running backs. But to the same point, like, you see the running backs that command their value, the guys that are the Austin Ecklers of the world, the Derrick Henrys, or whoever you want to name from a year in and year out, Christian McCaffrey from a year in and year out standpoint. I think because there's only 5 on the floor, not quite the same from basketball, but I do hear the point there. Mark, your thoughts?
I think it's more like this isn't even an exact comparison, but it's more like catcher in baseball. The elite ones still matter. Like I think the elite guards still matter, and you almost have to have an elite guard to win a title. I think the Celtics are a little bit of an anomaly because Tatum and Brown have such guard skills, and you have White and Drew as such solid guards. But I think there's a little bit of a market inefficiency on how valuable like the 20 to 25th best point guard is, like how valuable like a Fred VanVleet is. Like that, I keep going to him because that's the guy who I keep thinking of as that kind of level of player. But and in this scenario, I think you're probably signing Paul George and hoping to keep how many ever you can out of Batum and Oubre. So that just opens up a slot of need for McCain, because there's not a guard that really, unless you're trading for DeJounte Murray, but like there's not a guard that's like we're big game hunting for in terms of a trade or free agency signing. And we don't have we might keep Kyle Lowry and campaign around, but we don't have that guard to keep in-house to start next year necessarily either. So that's why I would look to a McCain in the draft and look to the free agency market for wings, hopefully.
Yeah, interesting. We will see how that all plays out there. But let's slide over to the 17th. Yeah, for sure. 17th pick, and another team that I do think needs a slam dunk pick here. That is the Los Angeles Lakers. And representing them will be Ryan Coyle. Beef, who are you going with? Who's joining LeBron James potentially out in Los Angeles?
Yeah, so I'm going to go with this freshman guard out of USC. I'm going to go with Kolek here. I really like Kolek as a basketball player. It's the Lakers are just like a weird fit. Like I wouldn't personally take him this high, but like you said, Sean, like you have to kind of play the safest route. And I was just reading D'Angelo Russell. It sounds like he's going to opt out, be a free agent. This would be a really unathletic kind of backcourt, but like Kolek is a savvy enough basketball mind to be able to kind of fit with LeBron. He's able to shoot the ball. And he's just like a safe kind of, what you're getting type pick. Like if with LeBron, you're obviously still going to try and go all in while you can, whether it's another year or 2 years. Like there's some more like high upside guy, maybe like a Collier instead, but I think Kolek's more kind of NBA ready. Kaishan George, if you're a fan of his, I think he's got potential. Carrington from Pitt as well. But I don't know if any of those guys are playing, in November, or even if the Lakers do get to the playoffs, playing meaningful minutes for you in April. So I think Kolek is a guy that can come in and play in the NBA from day one. Is he ever going to be anything special? I don't know. But with this team and LeBron, if you're kind of trying to build around him, I could also see the Lakers opting to trade this pick and maybe get a more rotation guy to a team that has like a lot of draft picks or something.
Yeah, I like Kolek. I've seen him attached to the Phoenix Suns for that 22nd pick, a good portion. I would like that fit for him as well, but I don't think the Lakers is bad either. I think 17 is probably a little high for where he ends up. And when you look at kind of the historical context of him as a player, it's not great for a guy that has a borderline first round label. It wouldn't shock me if he sneaks out of the first round completely, but I do like his game, and ultimately I'm a believer in how it will translate to the NBA level. I do think he is kind of a LeBron guy who has the brains to play next to him, has the ability. So I like that fit. Not a guy that I expected to hear coming out of your mouth, but you did kind of talk me into it a little bit. So Mark Henry Jr., your thoughts there?
Not much to add. I think that, yeah. By the way, I think McCain on the Lakers would be a perfect fit. So I think Booth was right on there.
Yeah, and for the comment, how likely is it McCain lasts? I think it's pretty likely that he's there at 16, particularly out of like the Sixers friendly options, which in my opinion are the Devin Carters, the Tristan De Silvas, the Rob Dillinghams, guys like that. I think McCain's probably the most set in stone that will likely be there. It's going to be weird to see how the draft plays out, because there is going to be the domino effect when some of these guys begin to go. But I do think McCain will be there for 16 and at least an option for the Sixers there. To transition to 18, we have the Orlando Magic on the clock, and I will be making that selection. Going overseas for this one to Tijan Salon, who's a guy who's been one of the bigger risers in this pre-draft process. So he's got all the physical tools and the traits that you look for as far as a real deal size wing. I'd be surprised if he makes it all the way down to 18. It does seem like there's a real push for him to potentially be definitely in the lottery and maybe even top 10. He's very raw. You're going to have to live with him. He's still just 18 years old, but I do believe that there is the framework of a high level player. He's 6'9", got a 7'1" wingspan. He's definitely picking for later, but Orlando can afford to do that. And they got a lot of talent there that's still figuring it out in the mix. I think Salon this is as far as he could possibly fall. And I think that'd be a really good pick for the Magic at 18. So Beef, any thoughts there?
Yeah, the length that he just kind of fits that Magic type of profile. And like you said, with kind of the logjam that they have in the rotation of youth right now, those things will get figured out over the next year or so. Maybe even Salon plays overseas for another year. I'm not sure what his status is, if he's kind of fully committed to that, but he won't be expected to play from day one, and let the Magic kind of figure it out over the next year or two, which guys they want to invest in long term, and then, kind of shuffle him into the rotation eventually.
Yeah, absolutely. Mark, any thoughts on Salon?
He was going to be the next pick for sure for the Toronto Raptors.
Fair enough. Well, we'll keep it right there with you on the clock for the 19th pick, representing the Toronto Raptors. Since I sniped your guy, what direction you going?
I'm looking up the pronunciation here because we were going Salon, so we got to stay Euro here. I mean, Beside loves that. But Pacome Didier.
Okay.
From France. He's a wing. I feel like they love taking swings on these types of guys. Bruno Caboclo was the legendary one. Who was 2 years away from being 2 years away. That's the legendary stuff right there. But he's a 6'8" wing. He's shown some ability to shoot off the catch. So they need shooting there in Toronto when you're building around Scotty Barnes. Obviously, everyone else needs to be able to shoot. So that's just an upside swing.
Yeah, I'll be honest. He was a guy that the first time I saw him, it was a who the hell is this dude kind of reaction, and why is he in the NBA draft? I watched a little bit of film on him, and he did pop to me a little bit. There's some athleticism there. There's a little bit of splash. He was a 15-point per game scorer. I do think he finds himself in the first round, and Toronto is the type of team to take those kind of swings. So I like that. I'm sure not a ton of hard-hitting analysis from Beef over there, so we can keep it sliding to the Cleveland Cavaliers with the 20th pick. But that is a good name to bring the conversation, Mark Henry Jr. So, Beef, where are we going for 20? Once again, the Cleveland Cavs are on the board.
Yeah, Cavaliers are in a weird spot as well. What does their offseason plan kind of look like? I'm sure that'll be dictated more so around this pick. Do they trade Garland? Do they trade Mitchell? What do they do? if they do wind up trading one of these guards, which it seems likely, I could see them going and getting Isaiah Collier there and taking kind of a swing on a guy who was, a top 5 projected pick coming into the year. Can he pan out? Is the NBA game a little bit more suited for him? Who does he work next to better? So I do think one of these guards get moved, and I think that the Cavs have a need on the wing a little bit as well. But I think it's going to be a more pressing need at guard, as it seems likely that they'll trade one of Mitchell or Darius Garland. So I'm going to go with Isaiah Collier there. Not the biggest overall fan of him, but I think the NBA circles kind of, especially with his pedigree and the fit here as well, I think makes sense. So a guy that was, a projected top 5 pick coming into the year slides down to 20. Still, I don't think is a broken player, and I think can still contribute next year in the NBA. Take a swing on that there, and hopefully he becomes kind of like a Tyrese Maxey for them. They look back and he's one of the steals of the draft.
Yeah, I'm with you. I'm kind of surprised how high I am on Collier at this point. He's not really my type of player. And honestly, when I watched USC this year, I pretty much had him written off. I think there was a lot wrong with that team as a whole, well beyond what one player had any impact on. I think Collier did himself a huge favor from coming back from injury and playing the way that he did to close the season. And I do believe that he's a guy whose game is built for the NBA more so than is the case for college. So I like that shot for Cleveland at 20. I think that's a good pick there. Mark Henry Jr., where are you at on Collier and your outlook for him?
I'm probably in the middle. Like, I see the vision, but I also understand the concerns. He was going to be the pick for the Suns coming up in a couple picks, though. So clearly I was high enough on him at this point where I think he'd take the swing.
Yeah, definitely. And we'll keep it rolling over the 21st pick, which is the New Orleans Pelicans, who I will be representing here. And I'm going to another guy who's been a riser throughout this draft process. That is Carlton Bub Carrington there. Guy from Pitt, one of the youngest players in this draft, just 18 years old. I love his mental outlook. Some of the quotes and the interviews that I've watched of his leading up to this draft really got me to buy in. Statistically, still got some work to do as a shooter, but that's going to be his calling card as a player, is filling up. He's definitely a bucket and a problem type player. He ran 12.6 pick and roll attempts per game at Pittsburgh this year, which is really high for college. Produced at almost 1.1 points per possession on that, which ranked in the 90th percentile. I think that's what the Bub Carrington experience is going to be, is you're going to get him in pick and roll quite a bit, have the opportunity to get that advantage and produce from it. So I like Bub Carrington. He's been a guy that has risen up my personal draft board quite a bit. Beef, what do you think about that pick for the 21st overall pick?
Yeah, the one thing I heard about Carrington that has really stuck with me through kind of my own research is he was a late bloomer. Like, he just kind of sprouted up over these past few years. And it was Randolph Childress from the Field of 68. He was saying he's a 6'5", 6'6" guard that still plays like he's 6'1", 6'2". Like, he doesn't know really, especially with his youth, how to kind of use that frame and use that new length, that new height to kind of his advantage. So once he starts to do that, figure that out a little bit more in the spot here, I believe, going to the Pelicans, I think that's kind of a good spot where he's not going to be thrown into the fire necessarily right away and can kind of mold and grow a little bit. So a guy that has definitely risen up my draft board as well. And I think that there's a definite good long-term future for him. I'm a big fan of his game.
Yeah, absolutely. So Mark Henry Jr., we went with Bub Carrington for the 21st pick to the Pelicans there. We're going to slide it over to 22, where you were on the clock representing the Phoenix Suns. What direction you going here?
I think you have to go with a point guard or a big, because you have Beal, Durant, and Booker and nothing else pretty much. So I'm going to go with a big, and I'm going to go with Vs Missy from Baylor. I think he makes a lot of sense there. He's a rim running big. It's all they need. All they need him to do is catch lobs and block shots. So I think he makes sense to kind of plug in and play right there. You could go with maybe someone that's more well-known, who was a National Player of the Year last year, if you don't care about defense at all. Or you could go with a guy who has maybe a bit more of a three-point shot from Dayton last year. But I think Missy makes a lot of sense if you're just looking at what the Suns need a big to do.
Yeah, all they need is for him to catch lobs and block shots, and I got great news because that is all he will be doing on a basketball court. The man attempted one jump shot all year, 0 3-point attempts, but I do kind of like that. That means you know exactly what your role is, you play within it. Still a guy with a lot to learn when it comes to the game of basketball as a whole, but is a guy that situationally will really depend. I think who his point guard is or who the primary creator or ball handler is, which in this case will be Devin Booker and Kevin Durant and Bradley Beal far more than a traditional point guard. But I think that will essentially decide who he is as a player. He's very much cut from the Clint Capella mold, and that's not the worst mold to be cut from. He's a guy who's done plenty well for himself at the NBA level. So any thoughts on Missy Beef?
Yeah, what Mark said about Deron Holmes, that probably would have been my pick there. I think he's a good fit. Both that he still has room to grow into, but also I think he's more ready to contribute at the NBA level than Missy is right now. I think I'm lower on Missy than most. I definitely don't think he's going to be, especially for a winning team, an impactful piece right now. Like I could see him being a young guy that guys like Beal, Durant, and Booker are kind of like frustrated at. Like, yo, coach, get this dude the hell out of the game. Like, we're trying to win a title. We know we're kind of up against it here with our title clock. So not a player that I kind of like there. He's more of a guy that like the Thunder, like you take a chance on him with one of your 90 picks if you can, and he doesn't have to play right away.
Yeah, saw the Sixers worked him out today. That would be a disaster pick at 16 for the Sixers if that's the case. I do think it makes much more sense for the Suns. So we'll keep it rolling here. The 23rd pick now on the clock. That will be the Milwaukee Bucks, and Ryan Beef Coyle will be representing them. What direction do they go with the 23rd overall pick?
Yeah, I think when you look at the Bucks depth chart, the roster's kind of weak, like really top heavy. You kind of saw how it crumbled. I mean, obviously with that Giannis, but then Dame went down as well, but that backcourt's really thin. I mean, the listed starting two guard on the depth chart on ESPN is Pat Bev, and he's a free agent. So, and we've already gone through a bunch of the top point guards. I mean, according to ESPN's big board, we've already drafted the top the top 8 point guards on the board already, and this is so basically a third of the draft so far. So I don't think that there's a guy that I would probably want to reach on here. So I'm gonna go with Terrence Shannon Jr. Out of Illinois here. I think he fits the kind of win now mode for this Milwaukee Bucks team. He's a really gifted, talented scorer. I think he's a nice kind of third or fourth option whenever you want him to be next to Dame, Middleton, and Giannis, and a guy that's ready to play NBA minutes right away, a seasoned college player. Just got cleared of everything last week. That was good to see after that text message that came out about the got his ass. Like, that made me so mad. I was so happy to kind of see the right wrong or the wrong righted, however you want to say it, and him cleared and him able to go into this draft with a clear kind of scope. But I think he's going to be an NBA ready player from day one, and I think this is a good fit for him there with Milwaukee.
Yeah, I'm with you. I think this is a great pick. And as you mentioned, Terrence Shannon Jr. officially cleared of all charges, everything on the table there, so won't impact his NBA career. And it does seem like he's got the green light moving forward to just focus on basketball, which I do think is a great thing. As a basketball player, I love his game. He really impressed me this year and took a leap that I really didn't think he had in the tank. I think like if there's had a more traditional route through this draft prospect, we're talking about him in the teens here. I think at 23, that's a great spot for him. I think Milwaukee would be a good place. So I like the Terrence Shannon Jr. pick. Any thoughts on that, Mark, before we transition to back-to-back picks for you?
Not much. I feel weird about the whole Terrence Shannon thing. There's still some weird stuff in that case with Terrence Shannon. So he was cleared for sure. But he definitely also had there was some weird stuff that early on that came out in that case. So I don't know. I feel weird talking about it.
That's fair. And we don't got to dive any deeper into it than that, but we will transition to you for back-to-back picks for the New York Knicks here. Team that has more momentum than they've had in decades, and it will be interesting to see how they go. What's the direction you take with these picks, Mark?
I'm taking, of course, this would really upset me because they would get 2 players I would really like here. But if Jalen Tyson goes to the Knicks, he's just going to turn into a stud. And I think he's going to be a really good player wherever he goes. I really just don't understand how Jalen Tyson's a borderline first-round pick. He's been a role player at Texas Tech where he was kind of just a 3-and-D guy where he was just there to shoot threes and get steals and create turnovers. Then he went to California with high usage and really broke out, shot 36% on a volume amount of threes, averaged 20, even rebounded really well. He's 6'6", and he averaged 7 rebounds a game. Really a good amount of turnovers, but he also had a lot of assists. So he does have the ability to create for others. He's probably not a lead guard at the next level. So, but I think he would slot in perfectly as a 2. He's like above 40% catch and shoot 3-point shooter. I don't know what I'm missing. Like, I don't get why Jalen Tyson isn't going higher. I probably would have taken him higher and should have taken him higher for some of the teams I drafted for, but I felt weird taking him at like 16 or 14 when a lot of these mocks have him in the second round. Trillbro Dude thinks he's going in the first round no matter what, and it's a lock. He thinks he's going top 20. But the Knicks, I think Jalen Tyson makes a lot of sense. And then if you're looking for a big, Mitchell Robinson's been hurt a lot. Hartenstein even had some injuries as well. I think Deron Holmes makes a lot of sense for New York. And, they took the last Dayton stud big man with Obi Toppin and kind of messed them up. But maybe they won't do the same with Holmes. And I think Holmes, it all comes down to if you believe in the jumper with Holmes. I don't know if I think he's I don't think he's a 38.6% three-point shooter. I don't know if he's going to shoot threes at the next level, but the fact that he at least has the potential to be able to, I'm at least somewhat interested. He's a little undersized for me. I'm not generally a huge Deron Holmes guy, but at this point, I think it's a good pick.
Yeah, definitely. I like Holmes, and I like Tyson as well. That's been a guy that you kind of have hammered home to me of why is this guy not a first-round lock? And I haven't had a great answer for it. That I do think he checks just about every box that you should be looking for. Any thoughts on those two picks, Beef?
I really like Holmes. Tyson is definitely a guy I'm going to have to look up a little bit more because one of the, I guess, names from one of the, premier conferences, obviously the Pac-12 no more, but one of the guys from the major conferences of the draft that I'm really not as familiar with his game. Being a Cal player at Cal, I mean, I didn't really tune into them that much this year. I did bet on them a little bit, but didn't watch much Cal Bear basketball this year. So that's a guy I'm going to have to look up more. But I do like Deron Holmes. I think he's a player that I could see really molding into a good kind of second center, power forward, whatever you see him playing, kind of off the bench for a good team. I think that's a kind of good fit there, especially if they lose Hartenstein, which it sounds like I don't think they're going to be able to kind of throw him that $100 million. It sounds like I think he kind of fits into that athletic kind of backup big man role that he was, playing with Robinson, however you wanted to look at him as a starter or the backup.
Yeah, and a real deal athlete as well. He's got a little bit of a dribble handle. It's the athleticism that pops, the number one thing for me for Holmes. I do think there is some similarities with Obi Toppin. Obi, another level of athlete than Holmes, and certainly one of the more vertical, but kind of an interesting comparison there. I think that would be a slam dunk pick if the Knicks walk away with those two players there at 26 and 20 or 24 and 25 there. We will move to 26 with Beef on the clock representing the Washington Wizards. Beef also selected Donovan Clingan with the second overall pick to start this draft for the Wizards. What direction will you go with the 26th pick here?
The Wizards have a chance here to do something really funny and go Donovan Clingan and Zach Edey, kind of just have those guys playing off each other for years to come, rotating in offense for defense. Just a terrible front court, and Edey's still falling. It was just kind of surprising to me to see him there. I don't think that they'll wind up doing that. So I'll go with a guy that I do think kind of fits in the Donovan Clingan mold of a player that we know what we're getting from day one when he gets into the NBA, a really good college player. And he's bringing a day one skill set in his shooting. That's Baylor Shireman, a team that I think could add some more shooting there on the wing. Denny Avdia has not emerged into like a star or anything, but I think he's emerged into a good player. Corey Kispert, correct me if I'm wrong, has been a pretty consistent shooter throughout his NBA time so far.
Yeah.
Yeah, you throw in another guy like Shireman, who I do think brings a little bit more to the table outside of his shooting as well. We saw that kind of expanded game on a more higher stage these past 2 years at Creighton. He falls to this back half of the first round. Another player that I think is NBA ready from day one. So give me Baylor Shireman there.
Yeah, I love Baylor Shireman. I think this would be a great spot for him. I think, to be honest, any spot's going to be a great spot for him, that he will be one of those players that can just plug into any teams. I've also been doing the Zach Edey dance, trying to figure out where to plug him in here and haven't found the spot either. Mark, any strong opinions on Baylor Shireman there?
Love Shireman. Barnard's kind of gotten me to take more of a look at him. And I loved him in college, but he was one of, as you guys know, I was smitten with those Creighton teams the last 2 years, too much so this year for sure. But Baylor Shireman's a guy I love playing in college. And it's funny, there's some players you watch play a ton in college, but you never really think about like how they transition to the NBA until you see their name on an NBA draft list. And it's like, oh, okay, let me like kind of think about what they would look like. And yeah, he's a guy I probably didn't have pegged as an NBA athlete, But I think that was probably a mistake. I think he's going to be a guy who should go in the first round. And for instance, Denver with my pick coming up, he would have been the pick.
Like it a lot. And we'll keep it moving to the 27th pick. And I'm pretty torn on what direction I want to go with this one. Representing the Minnesota Timberwolves, once again, not a spot where I think Zach Edey can plug in, even though I think he's probably my best player on the board at this point. I'm going to go with a guy that I'm not a huge believer in, but I do think makes sense for this pick, that being Kaishan George out of Miami here. I'm curious to see your guys' full opinions on him. I wish there was a little bit more statistically to believe in, that we're talking about a dude that played 23 minutes per game, averaged 7.6 points, 3 rebounds, 2.2 assists, shot 40.8% from three, which is really intriguing on 4.2 3-point attempts per game. The athleticism is there. He's a guy who screams potential, but I think that you're going to have to wait a couple years to be the full beneficiary of that. I think for Minnesota that this is a nice spot where you can swing for the fence. And I do think stylistically he could be a guy that fits if he gets it from day one. I'm not that optimistic that that's going to be the case. I think he's going to have to grow into it a little more. But I think at 27, that's a fair spot to put him in a good place in Minnesota. So, Mark, what's your thoughts on Kaishan George and that fit in Minnesota?
Yeah, it makes a lot of sense. I don't have too many takes on Kaishan. But yeah, he's a guy who definitely makes a lot of sense at the back end of the first round here.
Mm-hmm. Beef, any thoughts on George?
Yeah, the profile fits kind of what Minnesota looks for on the wings and what we saw definitely throughout the playoffs with those guys. Also kind of fits like into that Magic realm. And another player like Carrington, where he's really sprouted up over the past few years. I think I saw he's grown 5 inches over the past 2 years or something. So he might even have, another inch or two in him. Long, wiry guy, athletic, can shoot the ball. All the buzzwords there. So could be one of those steel type players in a few years. You might just need a little bit more seasoning.
Yeah, absolutely there. And we are now down to the last 3 picks of the first round here. Each of us with one more pick to make. At 28, we're going to Mark Henry Jr., who has the Denver Nuggets, who he will be representing, an organization which has done a really nice job selecting in recent years. Mark, does that continue this year, and who will that name be?
A guy that I really, really like, and he's a guy who the Sixers at 41, I would be lusting for this guy to fall to 41, and it's Harrison Ingram
Nice.
From North Carolina. I think he just makes a ton of sense as a 3-and-D role player wing, and I think Denver is just going to land like a perfect guy like him. A couple other guys I considered were like Johnny Furphy. I considered KJ Simpson, but I don't know if he can play with Jamal, so I stayed away. I considered Pell Larson from Arizona, who's a guy in the second round who I'm a little bit higher on, I think, than a consensus. I figure you guys probably won't draft those guys, so we're going to throw them out.
Yeah, no, that all makes sense to me. And by the way, Ingram, a terrific rebounder, 8.8 rebounds per game this year. I was disappointed to see. Beef, what was it you told me he measured in at 6'5" at the combine?
Yeah, it was like 6'5", 6'5", and like 3/4 or something. Like, yeah,
I was very surprised by that and disappointed by that, because kind of my take on Harrison Ingram, Mark, was that I thought he was going to kind of follow a little bit of this Kevon Looney archetype, where he is a traditional wing to an extent in college and kind of morphs into like a basically center by the time he gets to the NBA. That kind of poked a hole in that one, what he measured in it, but that's what my eyes were telling me from watching this year. Very surprised to see him measure in at that, but I do think at 28, it's a great spot for him. He's a nice connective piece. I think he's going to be a winning player on wherever he ends up, and Denver can absolutely be that for him.
That's bizarre.
He was 6'7". Sorry, Mark, but he was 6'7" in shoes, though. It says his measurement. Like, you play basketball in shoes.
Yeah, you do.
Like, so does everyone, though. So you don't really get that advantage there. Mark, what were you going to say?
But he's too good of a shooter to be Kevon Looney almost in some ways, though. But I see what you're saying with the way he defends and the way he rebounds. But he's got a 7'1" wingspan. It's just wild that he's only 6'5". That's shocking to hear.
Yeah, definitely. So interesting there. We'll slide to 29 to the Utah Jazz. Beef up front, back on the clock. And just as a reminder, you took Jacoby Walter with the 10th pick in this year's draft. Where will you go with 29 for the Jazz?
I'm going to kind of sit there in the same mold and go with, I think, a Danny Ainge pick, a player that has upside, didn't necessarily live up to the hype this year, but another player that was a top 5 type of player coming into this class, and Justin Edwards. I'm going to slide him in there as well there on the wing. If you get Jacoby Walter and Justin Edwards in the first round, and one of those dudes pans out, I think you're taking that 9 times out of 10. Just feels like a Danny Ainge pick, high pedigree guy, athleticism, raw ability there on the wing. And Mark, as you've been kind of touching on, when you have the ability to take the swing for some of these potential high profile wings, like you don't need an absolute safe pick. You do it because they're so far and few and far between in this draft, especially. So Justin Edwards, we saw in spurts what kind of player he could be. I don't think he'll ever be the type that was talked about as a previous number one overall recruit type of selection. But I'm going Jacoby Walter and Justin Edwards for the Jazz. And like I said, one of those guys pans out to their full ability, you're going to probably be getting a fringe level type all-star, I think, one day.
Love it. Yeah. I'm very curious where Edwards lands in this draft. I've seen a lot in the second round. I kind of am more of the mindset that I do think a team takes a stab at him in the first. There's pretty good track record for betting on Kentucky guards who don't quite perform well. I think he fits that bill exactly. So I'm with you. I also think, like, as much as we talked about Reed Shepherd and Rob Dillingham, those are guys who I think their games were a little bit made for college than I think that Justin Edwards was the case. So I do think that he's going to shine at the next level. I like that pick at 29. Mark, what about you?
Yeah, no, he's a high profile guy or a high pedigree guy. Yeah, the Kentucky guard it's definitely always fun to take a swing on a Kentucky guard that falls.
Absolutely. And we'll wrap things up with the 30th overall pick. The unfortunately champion Boston Celtics are adding with the opposite of an upside swing, and they're taking Zach Edey here. Could not let him get out of the first round. And I actually think that's a pretty good spot for him. We know Big Al up there in age. Not sure how much longer he's going to end up doing it. Porzingis has been terrific, but Luke Cornett is not quite the long-term solution. They did do some nice things adding some guys, but I think Edey would provide an interesting element to that. He can be a shot blocker. I've become a Zach Edey believer. I get he's not perfect. He's not going to play in all situations, but as a rotational big man, I do think that this guy's more competitive than he gets credit. I think a lot of times when you see like a bizarre looking big man that you kind of label him as soft in your head, that's not Zach Edey, that he's going to compete. He's going to leave it all out there. And I think that there are areas in which his size is just going to be a problem. So I think that would provide an interesting element to the Boston Celtics. I'm going to lock him in for the 30th overall pick there. Mark, what are your thoughts?
I don't think he has a chance to be an NBA player. I've been consistent with this. He's the slow. The minute he's drafted, he will be the slowest player in the NBA. I think he will have the same issue that Boban Marjanovic has, which is that anytime he's out there, he gets put in the pick and roll. So you can play drop if you want. But if you play drop in 2024, most teams are going to make you pay for that at this point. So, yes, he definitely can hang on offense. I mean, he's a good offensive player. Problem is, I don't think there's a lot of NBA offenses that are going to want to turn over their offense to a guy who's a back-to-the-basket post scorer in 2024, because getting 2 points is a lot worse than getting 3 at this point. I mean, just ask Joe Mazzulla. And that's why I don't think this would be their pick, too. They just value the three-pointer too much. I think they want their center to either be able to shoot or rim protect. And I don't think Edey can do either. So that's what I want my centers to do generally, is shoot or rim protect. So Edey's like the exact opposite of what I'd ever be interested in. If Jahlil Okafor didn't work out, I don't see a way that Zach Edey does.
Yeah, I mean, he's certainly not perfect. I do think he can.
We picked him at 30 here. He's probably going to go like 12 or 13, and that's when I'll have a problem with it. So I don't have a problem taking him at 30, really, but I don't see it.
Yeah, I know, Beef, you are an Edey truther and believer there. Give me the sell of why this can be the case.
Well, we're at 30 and Beef didn't take him, so clearly he's not too much of a truther.
It's a good point.
Well, I was going to pair him with Donovan Clingan, those two for life together. But yeah, no, it is one thing where it's kind of hard, where he's such an anomaly. It's kind of hard to find a spot for him. I think he'd benefit from going to a bad team, a team maybe that's like looking to or that's in kind of a rebuild. Like maybe the Pistons add him to the logjam in that front court as well. But I think he just kind of has to go out there and just play. He's not a guy that you're going to really be building much more kind of potential into. I also don't think he's going to be a player on a winning team right away, but 25 and 12. I know he's the biggest player on the floor at all times, but someone's going to take a chance on him. I was surprised to see him fall this far. I do think maybe like Kyle Filipowski to the Celtics is maybe a little bit more kind of their speed there. But that was before we kind of wrap this up, I was looking through some of the guys. I mean, his name was probably the one I was surprised most that I didn't see in the first round. Maybe even Ryan Dunn with his defensive ability. I think someone one of these playoff teams might be like, or even trade up into the first round and be like, hey, we're just going to get this and know what we're getting from him. But I'd say Ryan Dunn and Filipowski were probably two of the guys I was surprised to not see off the board. And I think he would even be in consideration there for the Celtics because they're not going to be able to keep all these wings and all these defensive guys forever. So they're going to have to, develop into some of these guys that play behind Brown and Tatum going forward.
Yeah, spot on there. And it will be interesting to see. I do think that there is more of a blank canvas than is typically the case for this year's NBA draft. That's going to do it for us. I'm going to run through it just one more time, taking a look at our official mock draft here. So we have number 1, the Atlanta Hawks taking Alex Sarr. Number 2, the Washington Wizards with Donovan Clingan. Houston Rockets taking Zachary Reese-Shea at number 3. The San Antonio Spurs, number 4 with Reed Shepherd. Detroit Pistons 5 with Matas Buzelis. Charlotte Hornets at 6 with Nikola Topic. Portland Trailblazers at 7 with Dalton Connect. San Antonio Spurs at 8 as Stephon Castle. 9, the Memphis Grizzlies selecting Cody Williams. 10, the Utah Jazz, Jacoby Walter. 11, the Chicago Bulls, Ron Holland. Number 12, the Oklahoma City Thunder, Rob Dillingham. 13th, the Sacramento Kings, Tristan Da Silva. 14, the Portland Trailblazers with Khalil Ware. 15, the Miami Heat, Devin Carter. 16, the Philadelphia 76ers, Jared McCain. 17, the Los Angeles Lakers, Tyler Kolek. 18, Orlando Magic, Tijan Salan. 19, the Toronto Raptors, Pacome Didier, whatever that guy, however you say that one there, I'm going to have to iron that one out. But number 20, we have the Cleveland Cavaliers with Isaiah Collier. 21, New Orleans Pelicans, Bub Carrington. 22, the Phoenix Sun, Yves Missy. 23, the Milwaukee Bucks, Terrence Shannon Jr. 24, the New York Knicks, Jalen Tyson. 25, the New York Knicks, Deron Holmes. 26, the Washington Wizards, Baylor Shireman. 27, the Minnesota Timberwolves with Keyshawn George. 28, the Denver Nuggets with Harrison Ingram. 29, the Utah Jazz with Justin Edwards. And 30, the Boston Celtics with Zach Edey. So before we fully wrap up here, any last words for you guys for any prospects you want to get in the mix or anything else you got going on?
The Bulls are going to take Edey at 11.
I could see it. I could definitely see it.
To put him with Vucevic and be like, learn from this guy. That's what they're going to do. And it's going to be a terrible pick. That's
yeah. The Bulls, man. I think the Bulls have officially taken the cake as my poorest run organization. I think they beat out the Brooklyn Nets.
They haven't made a trade in like 3 years, right?
2021 was the last time they've traded a player. That's just organizational malpractice there. But Beef, any last words from you?
I guess I would have one question for you guys. If at 16, Sixers sit there and pick, I know we already kind of struck luck in the draft with Maxey, but if there is one guy that'll probably be there around the 16 point that you think could develop into a future all-star, who would it be? And why would you take him for the Sixers if there's a name that's kind of been sticking? I'll let you guys think about it, but the one for me I think might be Carrington from Pitt. I just think kind of his fit next to Maxey maybe for the long term could work out as kind of that 6'5", 6'6" guard, a little bit bigger there in the backcourt, but he's the guy that I think has the most upside to grow into if he falls to the Sixers there. So that would be my pick for that question, but was curious if you guys had anyone that was sticking out to you.
I think my answer would be either of the guys that I see falling right now. And by that, I mean Ron Holland and Rob Dillingham, that I think each of those guys do have a little bit of all-star potential. I'm higher on Holland for the long-term NBA perspective, but that's probably my answer is whichever these guys kind of fall out of the mix there. I think a lot of the options at 16 are who they are type guys, which I don't think is a bad thing for the Sixers. But if we're talking upside, I think Holland or Dillingham is my answers there.
I don't think there's oxygen for a third all-star with the Sixers. But if I made myself kind of stretch and think about it, I don't know if he's even potentially going to be there at 16, but I would go Jacoby Walter, I guess, just because of the way he's able to draw fouls and if that jumper is lethal at the next level. 6'10" wingspan obviously gives him such a high potential defensively, even if we haven't seen it. But yeah, I'll go Jacoby Walter, I guess.
I like that. So a lot of good conversation. There is a lot more to break down ahead of the NBA draft. Me and Ryan will continue breaking out some prospect profiles, so stay posted for that on there. Me and Mark Henry Jr. will be back on action on Saturday from 11 to 1 on Fox Sports The Gambler, the Tough Cover radio show there. So keep it locked for all that. Make sure you're subscribing and liking wherever you are at. Appreciate each and every one of you guys for tuning into this stream. And once again, keep it rocking, keep it locked here, and we'll talk next time. Peace.